Hello and welcome again to the Steeler Fury podcast, the Pittsburgh Steelers show. I am your host, as always, Wil Masisak. You might know me as Accidental Zen from Twitter, or perhaps Bradshaw to Ben if you're on SteelerFury.com. We have a very special program today. We're going to talk about my annual B2B Directional State team of underappreciated and small schooler NFL draft prospects. And to talk about that, we have one of the absolute experts on this subject. He is the director of scouting for Consensus Draft Services. He also hosts a show called Draft Central on Nuts and Bolts Sports, and he's a special contributor to the NFL Draft Bible regarding the HBCU prospects. He's all over Twitter, too. 11 Bravo, what's the tag?
138, yep.
11 Bravo, 138. His name is Bill Carroll. He's with us. How are you, sir?
I'll be honest. I have just enough bandwidth to get through this next couple of weeks. That's where I am. But I'm enjoying it. Like, it's my favorite time of year. But yeah, I'm about to lose some other critical functions if this draft doesn't come soon.
Yeah, and I mean, just to give you an idea, I think I am. I will have recorded and will have finished producing 7 or 8 hours of content just for this week. Okay, a podcast and videos that are up. It's just like, it is definitely, I've reached the max. I can't add anything else no matter what I do. But, it is the one time, it's worth it because this is it. This is the time of year to really talk about these players. Yep. And a lot of these, particularly small schoolers and underappreciated guys, until you see them as late round draft picks or as UDFAs or as, guys that surprise in camp that no one ever heard of except for you. You're like, I know that guy, I have him. So that's, all the better reason to talk about that now. So you have your own version of this that you call the all underappreciated team?
All underappreciated team, yeah. I started doing it years ago, back in my days with Consensus Draft Services when I was a staff member of the website. And we had an all-American and all-conference teams, whatever. And I kind of said, this is cool. I loved it. But I said, what if we also had, something different from what everyone else does? And I coined, I think I named it, the all underappreciated team. And I still remember some of the guys from the original team, like Chris Gokong, who ended up having a nice little career with the Eagles.
Sure.
And a few other guys that are out there. Some of the alumni of the all underappreciated team have done quite well for themselves, and there's some guys from more recent teams that are in the league now.
Yeah, I mean, I have my history with my Bradshaw to Ben, aka B2B Directional State team, became sort of a joke because I would always focus on these players that no one else knew about. It became my niche. I was in a mock draft at Steeler Fury for 20 years now. And some of the guys were like Joel Bucksbaum devotees, who knew everything about scouting. And they're, I'm competing against pros. I'd never be able to get them with the top players. But my niche was I found players that they didn't, scout as heavily. So that was kind of interesting. I mean, the one guy I'm really hanging my hat on now was my player of the year. He's now the starting tight end, basically, for the Green Bay Packers. From Indiana State University, yes. Rob Tonyan. He's changing the pronunciation of his name now, like Tony.
Yes. right. But that it's like the old Dizzy Dean quote about, why does everyone ask you about your origins as a child? They get a different story. It's like, I want everyone to have an exclusive. So it's sort of like that. My guy, who I feel almost like a Dutch uncle's pride with, is another undrafted tight end, Donald Parham from Stetson. So we each have a tight end that we sort of hung our hat on.
Yeah, Donald Parham was one of my award winners too. So yeah, we probably have some similar tastes, but I think it'd be interesting to see maybe some guys. I would love nothing better than to hear about 50 guys that I don't know about that you're into. Okay. Tell me this. What is the criteria for you that you use?
So it's an inverse ratio between hype and production is sort of how I put it.
That's perfectly said, yeah.
Is it possible for a big school guy to make it? Yes, but it's harder, right? Because he's likely to be more recognized. So, and a guy can play himself or be recognized off of it. Like preseason, Greg Newsome was on my list. And then by a few weeks into the season, he was off it.
Yeah, I get you.
Right? So no longer can I claim that you're underappreciated when everybody's, anointing you as a guy who's going to go some more in probably the 20s or whatever in the first round.
Sure.
So I've had that happen to me a few times. I mean, I guess another famous example is and he washed out, so I'm glad I took him off the list. Memphis quarterback that the Denver Broncos reached on.
Paxton Lynch.
Thank you, Paxton Lynch. So once again, preseason, he was on my list, and then about 4 or 5 games of the season, you're off the list because now everybody's talking about you.
Yeah.
So that's how it works, is that it is like a direct and inverse ratio between the hype level. Right. So if everyone's talking about a guy but they're talking about as a third rounder, and I still think that's underappreciated, he can still make the team, but it's harder. Like, so the more people see you and recognize you, the harder it is. So I've had to pull a couple guys off the team, like say Greg Newsom being one of the most famous examples this year.
Sure.
So that's how that works. And then can a guy play his way onto the list? It's harder. So if you started out, say the year before, people were talking about you, but this year they forgot about you. Right. I've had that happen a few times where when the preseason, early going up to the beginning of the season, he's not on the list, but people somehow forget. Then a guy can work his way onto the list. I've had that happen. The closest I can think of was actually Casey Hampton, believe it or not, because the preseason before, people had sort of talked a lot about him, and then Sean Rogers became the guy, and people just ignored Casey Hampton. I'm like, I think this guy better, But I mean, I know that this guy's huge. I know some of the love for Rogers. He's just a giant of a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I kept waiting for him in his career to finally match that. But reach that potential, but it never kind of happened.
Well, he didn't do it in college either, so I never quite got the love. Consistently, Casey Hampton was off the ball first. Consistently, Casey Hampton was better at reading, the blocking and things like that. But so that's the way my list works: is that I have a preseason watch list, and then I narrow in a very. It's not very narrow, but I have like 100 and some odd guys that I'm starting out, and then I sort of try to chip away at it. And like I said, if a guy suddenly goes to the Senior Bowl, or even before that, and everyone's like, okay, well, you're off the list.
Yeah,
sure. So yeah, like Miners was on the list, he's off. Dylan Radones was on the list, he's off. Right. So I've had a few guys. So my list changes based on how the draft community sees a player.
So I'm a sort of partially in that camp. Like for me, I would say it's two things: value buy. So you can be a top pick and still make my list, maybe 1 or 2 guys like that a year, but it's because the value still of where the people are talking about you doesn't match where you actually are. I was tempted to put Patrick Mahomes when in his draft year, because I had him as I saw 15 minutes of his film famously, and I went on Twitter and was like, this is what a Hall of Fame quarterback looks like, and we've just forgotten, because we're also looking for he's got to have his hands in the right place and his footwork, and that guy, that's just like a transcendent player. Right. Even if they're supposed to go pick 20 or pick 15.
And also people got whining about his offense. Remember that? But he's in an offense. It doesn't translate.
No, they don't produce any quarterbacks, So yes, if you're that much of a value buy, you're still, got a chance to make my list. But I have, directional schools in the title. So I feel a little responsibility to recognize players from, the non-Power 5 schools and from, FCS and from lower divisions in some cases. So I have mostly, I lean towards players. So even a guy that's overhyped a little bit, like Quinn Miners, is still making my list because, it's the perfect kind of candidate for, who I would like to recognize. And he'll get his recognition in the NFL. But,
yes.
He is an interesting character that, will probably play in the league for a long time because the small school, the best guy at the small school often is a better player than, the middling guy at a Power 5 school.
Yes.
And we've had this conversation before.
We've had it many times. Yeah. And I'm going to apologize once again to Jim Nagy and anyone else who I've ever bothered at the Senior Bowl. One of my pet peeves is when guys who are like rotational or backups, in college get invited to the Senior Bowl while some guy who's just flat out killing it at a group of 5 or a non-FBS program is waiting, goes uninvited. And I understand how things work. Like I know how it happens, and
there's some politics involved,
of course, and there always will be.
But it's like, okay, so a player that I have was a good place to start. The underappreciated non-Power 5 offensive player of the year. His name is wide receiver Jalen Darden from North Texas. Now, how is Jalen Darden not invited to the Senior Bowl?
Yes.
No offense once again to Jim Nagy, I think is great at promoting players that most people don't. But still, it's like that's the kind of guy that you really need to have there.
So I'm going to give you mine. If we're starting with wide receivers, my bothered the living daylights out of poor Jim Nagy about guy was Michael Strahan from Charleston, and I started early. I figured if I start early, maybe it'll work better because sometimes I start the bothering too late. So I started the bothering, so he did feature him. He did like a small school Saturday feature, and that got my hopes up a little bit. But he talked about him a little bit in the small school Saturday thing that he did prior to the season, and so I hope that would give Michael a chance. Michael is much like with Donald Parham, a guy who some work's going to have to go into it. He was a guy that was a track guy. He's from the Bahamas. He grew up in the Bahamas and came here as a teenager in his early teens and got exposed to football, but was a track guy primarily. And went to Liberty High School, which is the high school, not Liberty. Yeah, it is. The high school is associated with Liberty University, but didn't end up going to Liberty University. Ends up at Charleston, of all places. He has a younger brother named Prince Strahan, who I think will end up at a bigger school because Prince is getting a little more recognition as a prospect early on in his recruitment process. But Michael is a big, fast receiver who is physically powerful. He may have, amongst the real receivers, like there's a few guys who are like, tweeners between tight end and receiver, but amongst the real receivers, I think he might have had the highest number of bench reps, which surprised me because he was like mostly a track guy until, the last really 4 years. The ceiling for Michael is, I hate to exaggerate, but Vincent Jackson is the ceiling.
Right. No, that's the type of player he is. It's just the way they used him. You can tell he's a raw player, but also their offense was, they basically either gave the ball to him on a slant or he's going,
Right.
So it was one of two things.
It was either slant or a 9 route. Yes, I agree. It wasn't a lot of, either in between.
And they ran a lot, so it was kind of like they used him. Just go out wide and you'll take a guy with you and we're going to run the ball. So it's hard to, for him to reach his full, he's not being pushed necessarily to fulfill his potential, but I agree with you that, man, he goes to the right kind of team where they can mold him. What a choice. He's a big kid with amazing athleticism. He was a off the charts tester. But what's funny is the sport can support a guy who's at the complete opposite end of the spectrum in Jalen Darden, who is a smaller, undersized receiver. I think he might be 10 pounds or 15 pounds heavier than Devonta.
But not much bigger. Right?
But I'm saying he's in that same ballpark of size. But the thing about him is that I found, and the reason I wanted to recognize him is I've never watched a player so much where he caught the ball and you thought, oh, this is going to be a short gain, and it ends up being a touchdown. Like it's not, and it isn't because he has breakaway speed exactly, and it's not even like he's like juking guys out of there. It's just he makes this quick alteration to his first step. Like he would be hemmed in on the sideline on a screen pass with 3 or 5 defenders and just score easily. Like it wasn't even close. Really amazing after the catch skills and enough speed and enough wiliness to get deep.
Yeah, I'm a fan, and I first heard of him through a relative named Tukey Darden, Norman Darden, who is a sort of similar player, but shorter and thicker, right? I think Norman is probably close to 200 pounds and like 5'6" and change. So he's but very shifty and fast for a blocky. Like he moves better than you would think a chunky guy like that would move. And he started telling me about Jalen even before he got to college. I kept an eye on him, and it's like, okay, there he is. And I watched his whole career. I think that, once again, situation matters so much, especially for guys that are late round draft picks. But if Jalen goes to the right situation, oh my.
Yeah.
I don't want to blow things out of proportion, but he's more athletic than Antonio Brown, right? Jumps higher, runs faster.
Yeah.
With some of the same, and once again, I'm not saying he's Antonio Brown, but some of the same things that allowed Antonio Brown to become Antonio Brown are things that Jalen has, and he's a more athletic player.
Yeah, which is, that's you're really saying something with that. But yeah, it's sort of a fit. You're absolutely right. You get somebody that is willing to use him in some creative ways, and especially if they have deep threats that carry, bigger guys on the outside that carry the play and leave him room underneath. He's going to have some things to work with. I'm totally afraid that if we go too far down, there's so many wide receivers. If we
could do it just on wide receivers.
I know. So unfortunately, I think we probably have to go on. We can, if we miss anybody at the end, we'll throw a name in there.
Well, but I'd like to talk about the corners because I don't think the corners as a group are getting enough love.
I concur. And their class is just as deep as a wide receivers for sure.
Thank you. Exactly. I was about to say that everyone's all goo gaga over the wide receiver class, and I think the cornerback class has a chance to be just as good. It's a really good class.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it has a lot of names who are not the household names. There are plenty of corners at the top that everybody knows about, and the guys whose fathers played in the league. But I think I have an idea. But who would you say who is your favorite corner that people are not talking about?
Well, yeah, we off air talked about one of them already. I love a couple of guys in particular. And one of them we talked about, Mac McCain. And I think only injuries have kept Mac McCain from getting a little more love that he's got. And the fact, obviously, he plays at an HBCU. But he's at a good one. He's at one of the top ones that NCAA has put a couple of guys in the league recently.
Yep.
And in fact, it was a couple of years ago, in the Celebration Bowl where he first really jumped into my face. He was the best player on the field, and this is when Tariq Cohen was still playing
there, right? Exactly.
And I was like, wow! And then he missed almost all the next season. So,
well, in the Celebration Bowl, you had a 100-yard touchdown return. Is that interception return? Is that the game? Yeah,
he was the best player on the field, and Tariq Cohen was on the field. I don't know how best to stress this. And I love Tariq Cohen, but I was like, who's this kid? And it was like, he's just a what? He was a freshman at the time. Yep. And then he missed almost all of his sophomore year. And then his junior year, he got to play. And then this wiped out his senior year.
Right.
So that's part of, I think, why the hype hasn't really hit him. So Brian Mills is right now being talked about as the HBCU DB. And I like Brian Mills, but Mac McCain, to me, is better than Brian Mills in almost literally every category.
Yeah. Well, he certainly produced an unbelievable array of interceptions and interception returns, and just like a dynamic player that if you're in the secondary and guys even know you're good, they avoid you to a degree, and you still can make all these plays. It's really impressive.
Yeah, if he forget even like an SEC school, if he were at Tulane, he would be being talked about in the third, second range. Right? He's that kind of player. If he did the same thing at Tulane, forget the SEC. People be talking about him as a top 50 to 75 player. And the other one that I have just a deep and abiding love for, and there's a bunch of others I really like, is Shamar Jean-Charles from Appalachian State. And a lot of the same things I love about Mac McCain align with the things I also love about Shamar Jean-Charles. And I would say Shamar is probably an even better tackle if you're looking for it, and maybe not quite as dynamic in the open field, which is not really a diss because very few people on either side of the ball are as dynamic with the ball in their hands as Mac McCain. If Mac McCain doesn't immediately get a lot of run in your secondary, he's going to be a punt returner and a dynamic punt returner.
Right. It sure seems like it, yeah.
Oh, I can't imagine that you wouldn't. How many teams have a better punt returner? Probably 4 or 5, but other than a handful of teams, I would think he could be a punt returner for probably 80% or more of the teams in the NFL.
Yeah, not if he goes to Pittsburgh because, they don't let any defensive players return the ball, which is unbelievable because, one of the greatest returners in the history of the franchise is the cornerback, So, yeah, exactly.
It's out of my hands, Will. I don't know what you want me to do about that. That's the word silly doesn't even do it justice, but okay.
Yeah. How funny. The other guy that, just a quick mention, that I was completely unknown to me, never noticed him in any of the other stuff that I watched, and this year just sort of popped out to me, was Benjamin St. Juste from Minnesota, who's a bigger corner, since we've talked about kind of slot guys.
A giant corner.
And the thing is, especially for a tall corner, man, his ability to corner and to cover guys, and you get to the Senior Bowl and these one-on-one coverage drills, it's like made for the wide receivers. They know where they're going.
The deck is stacked against the DB.
They have a two-way go and whatever, and he managed to read and react what those guys were doing at his size, which I thought was kind of impressive. So another guy that I just want to give a shout out to.
Very.
He's in Canada,
he's a little too well known. He started once again, just like he and Greg Newsome played themselves off my list.
Yeah.
So when the season began, I had those two guys on my list, and it was like, oh man, now everybody's talking about. But first, it was Newsome. Newsome left by about week 3, and then took a little later for St. Just, but everybody was all, once again, the Senior Bowl was like, okay, well, darn it. But yeah, I love it. All the things that I normally don't like about tall corners, he does well, right? He can break down to tackle in the open field. He doesn't struggle with that. I remember, and once again, I'm not here to black anyone's name, but I remember everyone started to fall in love with a guy named Stanley Jean-Baptiste out of Nebraska a few years ago.
Sure.
Because he was a giant corner. And I just couldn't get the same excitement because he struggled mightily to break down the tackle and double moves. It wasn't fair. Double moves left him essentially naked on the field. So I just knew that this wasn't probably like to happen for him. St. Just is so different. Physically similar, right? About the same size, almost as fast. The other thing, Jean-Baptiste was fast in a straight line, but not very able to change direction. No. St. Just may be a little slower in a straight line, but is much better at changing. No,
he's like a slot corner level of agility.
Yeah.
Right. So
exactly. So I'm with you on that. I'm a big fan.
Nice. Well, I got a player that is my B2B Directional State Player of the Year that is probably going to have typed his way off of your list. But he's a non-Power 5 guy, an edge guy. Maybe we view him as being a 5-tech or defensive end. Peyton Turner from Houston.
Oh yeah.
And the reason he wins this award this year is not just because he's a terrific player, and I think on to a future. And he's definitely undervalued. Nobody's talking about him as a first rounder. I think I would gleefully pick him in the latter part of the first round and feel totally fine about it. I like him better than many, or if not most, of the edges that are available in round 1. But the thing that puts him over the top is the motor on this guy.
Yes.
He's a football player who loves the game, and it's the nonstop energy. And I think every team needs a guy like that. He's got that like a TJ Watt kind of energy to him for Steelers fans. So just love the game.
I have an unfair advantage regarding Peyton Turner. So a very close friend of mine was part of the team that recruited Peyton Turner to Houston. And so he's now moved on. He's no longer with Houston, but he gave me a lot of inside information on Peyton Turner. And so I had some inside info on Peyton Turner going back to even really when he first got on campus, before he got on campus, really. Wow. And I was told that, of the guys we've got coming on, this is the guy we think has a chance to be really special. He and Marquez Stevenson were two guys that people were talking about, when they first got on campus, as these guys could be pros. And Marquez Stevenson improved, but his improvement was sort of like this.
Yeah.
And then Peyton Turner's improvement was like this.
Right.
Right. He hit like an afterburner and just exploded upwards. Once again, we talked about St. Just, the thing that stands out. Peyton Turner, we talked about guys who could look like they could play slot corner or something. Now, you wouldn't actually literally have Peyton Turner play slot corner, but look at his three-cone. Right. Look at his short shuttle. I mean, you're not going to go crazy and do that. But my gosh, his ability to stop, start, and change direction at that size is insane.
Yeah. I mean, I could just see him being the sort of a lot of teams that have 3-4 outside linebackers, they like to have one who's more of an agility guy who's who maybe dropping the coverage once in a while, and the other guy's a stronger guy against the run. And I could see Peyton Turner dropping into that 3-4 edge role, even though that's not exactly how he was used. He's like got that kind of athleticism. Lamar Woodley would be an example of a guy that he reminds me.
There you go. Yeah. But I don't think you'd want to do that a lot. But yes, I think he could.
But I'm saying, I feel like, it could be his position. It could be his position as an edge guy, but you could put him anywhere. That guy could be anywhere. He could be the kind of a 3-4 defensive 5-tech that actually is a pass rusher. He could be a 4-3 defensive end on the strong side or weak side.
Agreed.
He could do anything.
Yeah,
because you have that kind of athleticism and size and want to. I wouldn't put it past him.
He's rare and he's fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, let's make sure we get to some FCS and smaller guys, because I know that you'll be my compatriot. I have an award I've had for a few years now called "If This Were 1975, I'd Be a First Round Pick," or borderline too violent for this sport award. And usually this goes to like a safety that has 5 targeting calls and this kind of thing.
Right.
Who often are still good in the league. But this time I gave it to an offensive player, guard Sam Cooper from Merrimack.
Oh my gosh.
And the reason I say this is because it feels like every clip of him, he's just randomly looking for a guy and knocking him to the ground, whether it's before or after the whistle matters not.
No, he's not really too concerned about exactly at what point in the progress of the play. Once he finds a victim, that guy's going to go down. And the other fun thing, an interesting thing about him, if memory serves me well, he actually tested well, I think, physically also.
Pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Because, I mean, those guys are always fun to watch, but a lot of times they just are so limited athletically that,
that's right.
They just don't have a shot. He has a shot because he's also a pretty darn good athlete. Now, because it's not, 1978, he will have to probably make some changes to his playing style. Well,
yeah.
Otherwise, there'll be some trouble when he gets to the NFL. But everybody wants that, especially if you're an undrafted. He's probably like to be a priority undrafted free agent.
Right.
When he's the guy that is having a fist fight, right, with your starting D tackle. I mean, sometimes, attention's attention, Will. When you're an undrafted free agent, you got to find some way to get people to say, who is that crazy kid fighting Aaron Donald? Whatever. Whatever. Like,
yeah.
Who is that guy?
By the way, the guy who actually was supposedly fighting Aaron Donald recanted his story. Yeah, it's like,
well, because he realized it wasn't Aaron Donald.
And also that there'd be cameras. It's like somebody can prove that it's not me.
Right. So those two things combined. But right. But as someone said, if it were Aaron Donald, there would be enough of him left to testify. But the fun thing about, and people talk about Quinn Miners, and he also is a guy that finishes people with enthusiasm.
Sure.
But usually he manages to keep it somewhat within the confines of an actual football play.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, young Mr. Cooper, not at all concerned about
no.
those kinds of things.
I mean, one thing I'll say for guys, especially offensive linemen now, it's become so noticed when you pancake guys that they do it, I think, because they know someone's watching the film. It's like, their coaches says to them, hey, put as many guys down as you can because that's the way people will notice you. So, maybe that's part of the motivation. But yeah, you can say the ball is long past the guy and you're pancaking him, it's like, I'm sure he's like, come on, man,
Yeah, he has some things to clean up, but I don't know if you know his story, but my gosh.
No.
That kid's got a life story, man. Wow. His life story is a wow story. But I think that's also part of it is he feels especially driven because there's been a lot of, tragedy, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
That's happened in his past life, regarding his family. I think both his brother and his father may have been murdered.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah. But he is this won't surprise you. He is a legend in the weight room at Merrimack. I think he holds all the records for offensive linemen at Merrimack, in weightlifting at least. Power clean, bench, squat, all that. So,
nice.
It's like I said, it's not a surprise if you watched him play that he has an intense approach to the weight.
He's got some issues to work through, so I don't blame him. That's good. You take it out on the weights and your opponent. That's better than the guys who fight each other.
Yes.
There's a offensive tackle who I didn't put on my team this year because I still feel a little bad about the guys, his past and the kind of teammate that he is. Mm-hmm. But he plays at a very high level. But it's like every teammate is like terrible guy, bad anger. His history was bad with women. It's just like So better that you use that and direct it in a really positive way, right, for your life and your career. So.
And I can tell you this much. I like I said, I haven't completely ruled out that he gets drafted, but I know that there's at least 6 NFL teams that have contacted his agent, that requested film. So I think he's going to play for somebody.
See, this is why I can count on you. I can pull out a guy from Merrimack that most people don't even know that they play football or what conference they play in or what level they play at.
Well, there's a guy in there's at least one Merrimack guy in the league now, maybe 2.
Yeah. No, so it's not unknown. It's not that small a school, but it's just one of those schools. Like it was last year with Juwan Green from Albany, and people were like, "Where does Albany play?"
The Great Danes, baby.
Exactly. We'll be talking about their quarterback next year, I'm sure.
Yes.
If he decides to come out. Well, let's go. We've talked about my guys a lot. Give me one of your names of somebody that
I would be more than happy to do so.
Especially a smaller school guy.
I can say no more. So I'll go with I've got a few. We've talked about offensive line, we talked about corners, we talked about we didn't talk too much about here we go. Here we go. I'll hit you with another guy played himself off my list. But here, let's take a look at. It's not really that small. Well, it's not. It's power. It's a non-power 5.
Good enough.
I'll go smaller in a second. But I want to stay on this guy because he's sort of gotten lost in the shuffle. Jeremiah Haydell from Texas State, in terms of body control and hands, there's a handful of people that can touch him in the whole draft class from whatever school you want to name. Now, he's not super fast. He's not super big. So that's the thing that sort of works against him. He's the kind of guy that's going to have to make it either as a very late round draftee, but more likely as an undrafted free agent. He'll have to run down on kicks and, he'll have to really want it.
Yeah.
But he's the kind of guy where he might not have a single drop in a single practice. He has tremendous hands and amazing body control. So I wanted
hang on a second. Just what position are we talking about? Because I didn't
wide receiver Jeremiah Haydell from Texas State.
He is a wide receiver. Yeah, okay, I wasn't sure.
Yep. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's not a player that I know, so
should have gotten that off first. But it's just I wanted to mention him before I forgot.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because I knew if I didn't get him off out of my whatever, I might forget. But I'm gonna hit you with Keon Smith actually from Fayetteville State.
Fayetteville, yeah.
So there's a kid from Buffalo that everybody's sort of discovering or has discovered, right? Coyote Awasika. And when I watched them back to back, because sometimes I'll do that when I'm trying to decide, how much I like a player. I'll take a player that some people are putting at least in their top 150 in the case of Awasika, 150, 175.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And then I watch him and obviously, level competition, blah, blah, blah. But if you just watch how they move and what they do and you change direction and, can they locate a guy in space when they're out on a screen or they're pulling and hit him on the move and all things they're very similar players.
Right.
Very similar players. I mean, I'll give the slight edge.
Build and everything, yeah.
Yeah, similar in a bunch of ways. I'll give the slight edge to Awasika once again, level competition, blah, blah, blah. But if I wanted to get Coyote Awasika and I missed out on him in the 5th or whatever it is, and now I'm at the very end of the draft, and I'm thinking, do I want to wait around and see if I can get this guy as an undrafted free agent? If I've got a 7th rounder, especially if I have 2 7th rounders, and he's still on the board with my second 7th, there are worse things. Let me save myself some bidding and just bring you into camp as a draftee.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really think he's going to move inside the guard at the next level, but I really think that as a guard, he could have a very solid career, at very least as a reserve early on. And I think as he picks up, because he's just used to being able to throw people around, quite frankly.
Sure.
He's not used to.
I mean, and it's hard. You watch a player at Division II, and it's just not positive. Like, are we just seeing the level of competition difference?
Yep.
And also, guys who are really great athletes at that level, and it's not their fault, but they get complacent a little bit because they've never faced a guy who's really better than them.
Yep.
But there's nothing you can really critique. There's not a lot of criticisms I would have about his film that I was able to see. It's just he's a big dude who can move and seems to have good technique as a pass blocker and a run blocker.
Yep.
What's not to like?
What's not to like? And like I said, the whole, and you just mentioned the real conundrum. I mean, I spend probably way more of my actual time than I should watching guys from Division II, Division III in AIA, and 97.9% of them won't even get in a camp, right? but I'm still watching for the 2.1 that will.
Sure.
And right, because I'm a sicko. But it excites me when I find Keon Smith. It excites me when I find these guys. Darius Royster last year, right?
Yeah.
When I find the guys like, this guy can play. This guy can play at the next level. I hope he gets a legitimate chance. And will he need to be coached up? Maybe he even needs to spend a year on practice squad, maybe. But if you are willing to work with him, especially if you have good offensive line coaches, you're going to be like, we got him. Maybe it might take a year, but the next year when he's outplaying the 6-year veteran you're paying a whole lot of money to, you'll be like, oh.
Well, I think, like on my on the Steeler Fury, show years ago, we had this conversation when we were doing one of our, draft war rooms for the Steelers about the difference between reaching for a guy in the first round who's a wide receiver that runs a 4.2, whatever, and you're just like, this guy's super fast and he's big and he can play. And then you're like, you could pick that guy here, but if you can get in the 3rd round or 4th round a guy who is basically the same player that people aren't talking about that has similar potential, it's totally better to take the 4th round guy because there's less risk attached to it. So, and I remember the specific conversation was Darius Hayward-Bay, who was expected to go early, maybe not as early as he did, but early, and then Mike Wallace. It's like you pick Mike Wallace, 5 times out of 5 because with the less risk, but still the same kind of speed and measurables. Even if he doesn't work out, you seem better off, I think.
Sure. And he produced some. I mean, no offense, but Darius Hayward-Bay was just not a productive player, despite all of the things you want to talk about. He had a handful of highlight reel touchdown catches, where he just, managed to either jump over somebody or run past somebody. But there were all these, he would disappear for whole games, Will, despite the fact that he was this elite level athlete. That terrifies me. I just can't get behind guys that just, no matter what you are, there's guys that come out of Alabama and everyone's falling all over them, and I can't find them in 2 games. It's game 3 they come out and dominate. Well, where were you the first 2 games?
Yeah,
right. I can never fully get behind a guy that maybe it turns out you have an undisclosed injury. I mean, whatever. Sometimes I find out I'm wrong.
I'm sorry. I hear you. Yeah. Just quickly before we move on off of offensive linemen, you've probably seen a little bit more of him than I was able to. I've seen just like a couple of games. Jack Boutho IV from South Dakota School of Mines.
Oh my gosh, the RMAC conference, baby. so everyone has a guilty pleasure, right?
So yes, I watched all the Southland Conference games this year, and I love all the quarterbacks. But go ahead.
Oh, because how can you not? The Southland. I've said this half joking.
Defense? Who needs defense? Come on, man.
But I've said this half joking, right? I once I called the Southland Conference the Big 12 on 4 cups of espresso. But it's funny you should mention the RMAC, right? Okay, so. That was my guilty pleasure in D2 for a few years. They had a coach named Bob Stitt at School of Mines, who is an evil genius, for lack of putting it. If you just want to see some things that'll just make you cackle, look at some of the stuff Bob Stitt would draw up. And some of the Bob Stitt stuff is made its way all to the NFL. He did a lot of those little touch pass things where you'd have, and he would do it where it's not just one receiver in motion. He'd have one receiver running orbit motion and another one running a shorter motion, and the quarterback had multiple directions to do the little touch pass. He could do one forward, he could do one to the side, he could do one behind it. I'm not joking. Look it up. So you can imagine what kind of scores when his team was right he could put on people in a already sort of defensively challenged conference with the craziest of plays. Bob Stitt, man. Wow. Stuff he came up with. So I've been watching the RMAC for a while, and CSU Pueblo particularly was sort of my favorite sort of place to land. Not because they were the most fun to watch in terms of they weren't wild and crazy like Colorado Mines.
Yeah.
But they had good players. They had a lot of guys come down from bigger schools at CSU Pueblo. But yes. So that's when I first found your guy that you're talking about was a game against CSU Pueblo, which had the year I was watching, they had a guy that people were talking about might get drafted on the D-line. And so they locked horns a couple of times. And he handled it. And I was like, huh. And then I filed it away for future reference this year. And then I'll be honest, I didn't see them at all this year.
Yeah. It's amazing that they played. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, last year I saw him and liked him. So, and they always, as much as I hate to say it, it's hard to get too excited about some of these guys that I love on tape from D2 unless I also have pro day numbers.
Yeah.
Because if their pro day numbers are bad or, God forbid, even borderline, an NFL team won't even take a look at them.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, this is their moment, though. Like on our show right now.
Our show is exactly. This is their moment to be celebrated and loved. Correct.
Yeah. Well, I had the family of the D2 running back that I liked last year from West Virginia, that wrote me and were like, thank you so much. Their local paper interviewed me. Okay. Because I think I was the only person that ever recognized the poor kid. He was a great special teamer and running back from one of the West Virginia D2s last year, whose name escapes me right now, but on last year's Directional State team. Listen, we're going to run out of time, but I have 3 players that I still want to talk about. And if we haven't hit somebody after that you want to talk about, we're going to give you a chance. Bill Carroll, our guest, talking about small schoolers and unappreciated players. Kenny Randall from Charleston, defensive tackle, not the biggest defensive tackle. He's only just over 300 pounds, but man, I love his sort of strength and power, kind of the unsung hero there.
Charleston has 3 guys that I saw that I think have a chance. And obviously I've talked about one of them already because he should be drafted. But they have at least 2 other guys that I think can play in the NFL. And Randall's one of them. Randall reminds me a little bit of, remember Corey Peters?
Sure.
Of course you remember. That's a silly question. Now, he isn't as physically developed because, once again, I don't want to cast aspersions on the strength and conditioning program they have at Charleston, but I'm going to just go on a limb and guess it's not quite SEC level.
Yeah.
I'm going to just guess that. And so if my assumption is correct, he's one of those guys that I think could just become an absolute monster once he gets into a pro strength conditioning program.
Yeah. I just want to say that I was saying now that I just want to hire the Penn State strength and conditioning program. It doesn't matter if I have a football program or like some kind of other business. I just feel like whoever's running that department, I want them to work for me.
So, they seem to know what they're doing. I'll give them that.
And the offensive, line coach and coordinator at BYU every year is also another guy that I would hire to do anything. Those guys seem to be with it. Anyway, player number 2, Zach Davidson, the tight end punter.
Yes.
From Central Missouri, Central Missouri.
Yep, CMU.
Hey, I got it right. Okay.
Yep, you're right, Central Missouri. I'm a huge fan. And before I move on, though, I want to shout out a couple of the guys at Charleston.
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
Just real quick. Tyreek McAllister is a guy I think has a chance. The other wide receiver from Charleston, right? The smaller, more conventional looking receiver because he's not a giant, but he's a good player. I want to mention real quick a DB. Now I think he may be exercising an extra year of eligibility. So Kai Beckham, Kei Beckham. I have to go back and double check to see if he's good because that's the other thing that's been confusing me with all the small.
Oh, it's been a really hard year for what I'm doing. Yeah,
ridiculous.
Especially I had many players who went back that were on my list.
That's been driving me nuts. That's the other way that I've had to move guys around. You're coming back next year. Okay, you're coming for a 6th season, are you? So that's
exactly.
Yeah, a couple of guys. Yeah, in fact. He decided not to, but apparently at one point, Brady White considered coming back for a 7th year.
Yeah.
He already is a 6th year guy. He decided not to, but he thought about it.
But Brady, it's just like that. What a tough situation for guys like that, though.
So we would have had Dr. Brady White. He's working on his doctorate. We would have had Dr. Brady White out there playing quarterback for somebody.
That's crazy.
But yeah, those are the other 2 guys I wanted to shout out real quick from Charleston that you said, this might be their one chance. But, But yes, there's, I believe that there's at both the FCS and Division II level, particularly at the defensive back spot. I understand why people shy away from offensive and defensive linemen from lower levels to some extent.
Sure.
But I've seen enough over the years to tell me that if a guy is terrific in man coverage. And he's big enough and fast enough. He has a really good chance to make it, despite whoever he's been playing against, right? I don't care. I don't care. I don't put too much stock in level of competition matters. I'm not saying it doesn't, but look at Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie. Look at Carroll Green. There's a long list of smaller
There's always a market for those guys. Yeah.
If you can just lock someone up, period. If you can just lock someone up, and I need to give a little love to Brian Mills. Now, I told everyone he's not my top DB, from an HBCU, but he's my number 2. And he might end up moving to safety, maybe. He didn't have he did have let me rephrase that. He had a good pro day, but he didn't run a great 40. He was really good in everything but the 40, which when it comes to defensive backs can sometimes, to some people, seem like he didn't have a great day. He ran, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 4.59 to 4.64, which, right, it's not awful. But
there were slower guys than that playing in the league for 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're LSU, people somehow, are okay with it. The problem is he's not coming from LSU.
Right.
So,
well, you know how this is. If you were a 5-star recruit your junior year in high school, you'll always be an NFL prospect. It kind of doesn't matter what you do in the interim,
Sure.
They put your index card at Blesto, and you've got that index card the rest of your life. You're never taking it away.
Right. And so that, which, as you know, is one of the things that drives me insane. But yes, I've seen so many guys. I mean, no offense to Robert Condici or whoever I was going to mention, where they were just anointed, basically. And no matter what they did in college, somebody's going to take a shot on them, right? So I get that. But
Calvin Ridley, excuse me.
Right. And there's a list. There's a list. There's a decent sized list. So no matter what a guy does in college, I mean, all he has to do is, unless he goes to prison or dies. Right. Those are the two caveats. But
that might just postpone it. It won't necessarily eliminate them. Right.
Yes. But if you can avoid those two things, somebody's going to say, well, he couldn't have forgotten. They say this sometimes. Well, he couldn't have forgotten to play football, right? They just figure it was something went wrong, right? That's what they say to themselves. Like, literally, I've heard people say that. Well, he couldn't have forgotten to play football. So, but did he really ever know?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just at the right program and the right person sees you at the right camp. And you had one really good day of practice. Literally. Yeah. You took over this one practice where the right people were there, at a camp. Not even...
Sure.
Not a game.
No, at a camp, exactly.
A camp. Yeah.
Or the Army All-American game, and that's another one that if you were a stud there, they'll remember you forever,
Forever. Yes. No, I'm with you on that. Okay. So, some of my other top small school guys, and some of them are guys that are a little bit known. I mean, like, I think people have sort of picked up on some of them, and then some of them are still, a little off the beaten path. And of course, people have different definitions of small. So here's a guy that just barely stayed on my list. He's this close to falling off. It is Central Arkansas's Robert Rochelle. And
when you have a pro day like that, you'll get hyped.
Right. And he deserves the hype. In fairness, it's there on tape. He played with a couple of years ago. He played with another guy who's in the league, in Tremont Smith, and I noticed him then. Like, oh wow, I think I tweeted something out a couple of years ago that one of the best corner tandems I've seen all year is at Central Arkansas, and they've got more coming. Like Central Arkansas. Speaking of coaches, you want to blow in a call to who coaches the DBs at Central Arkansas? Because they're all good. all good.
And Central Florida's like that as well. It's like one of those, you're just like, what is happening with this school, right?
Yep.
That's great.
Yep. People have sort of discovered Drew Himmelman, so I won't spend too much time on him.
Oh, yeah, I like him as well. Hey, my comp, we're on a Steelers show, Alejandro Villanueva, with some of the same good and bad things.
Right, some of the good and bad things.
Yeah. I really liked him. He had a rough spring, but not entirely his fault.
Right. Here's a guy I want to make sure I mention. This is one of the guys that was a guy that I thought might end up being, once again, before everything happened that shut down their season, I thought might end up being like my defensive player of the year is Chris Garrett from Concordia St. Paul.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Once again, when you watch the tape, you're like, right? And you just got to calm yourself down, okay, I don't want to get too excited,
Right.
and I'm still trying to get accurate pro day numbers. This is driving me nuts.
Sure.
This is the bane of my existence this year, is trying to get accurate pro day numbers on the small school kids, because they aren't going to their own pro day. They're going to somebody else's pro day. And that means that the strength and conditioning people or wherever don't have a vested interest in how they do. Yeah. Right. So if it's a kid, if I call Rutgers as well, Rutgers kids, and they know that I'm trying to get word out on where their kids, like, oh yeah, he did this and this and this.
Yeah, I'll give you everything you want. Right.
But unfortunately, when I call, and I'm asking about the kid who's from Concordia St. Paul that came to Minnesota's pro day or whatever, it's like, oh yeah, is that the guy with the dreads?
Yeah. Yes, I can. And you're even lucky. You have people to call that will take your call. Like me, I'm just like asking on Twitter, like, where is this information? And it's like, oh, he's going back to school. Oh, that's great, because I had no idea.
Right, and that's the other thing. I keep running into. My understanding is that
he tested pretty well. Yep. I mean, in certain respects, anyway. His 40 time is not great. 4.81.
Right, for a guy who's not huge.
But a 1.57 first 10 is actually a pretty good number for him. And 707 3 cone. So yeah, there's a guy. I mean, there to me is like that'll get you into camp, I think, as a
And once again, his testing numbers are actually, and once again, I'm not comparing him to this person. I'm just saying his pro day numbers are fairly similar to one T-Sizzle, Terrell Suggs, who ran 4.88, but had a decent 10-yard split. Mm-hmm. And both of them had unexciting, unsexy verticals. Yeah. So he's a little lighter. I think T-Sizzle was 248 at his pro day, but they're otherwise very similar guys. And
I like his. I mean, he was fun to watch. It feels like he uses his quickness, which doesn't necessarily show up in testing, but he was able to, like, it's the counter move for him that I felt he was.
That's what I was going to say.
Good at it.
He does two things really, really well. And you just mentioned one of them. He does a really good job of creating situations where someone's off balance. And so he can even, quote unquote, people say overpower. He's not overpowering them. But he understands leverage, and he gets people leaning, and then uses that little bit of lean to go the other way, and they can't recover in time. He also has a good long arm stab that he uses to good effect. And even though he didn't have a terrific 40, he is quick, as you said. He gets on people before they have a chance to really gather themselves and figure out what they're going to do. Right. I'm going to, once again, this is no aspersions upon the Concordia St. Paul Strength and Conditioning Program. I'm going to just throw out there that I think he will put on 12 to 17 pounds very quickly if he's brought into a pro weight and conditioning program. And you're going to end up with a guy who's 255 to 260 pounds, probably in a matter of weeks. In my opinion. So I think that he will be a guy who will be stronger and even more explosive. I mean, I'll be honest, some of these guys are literally hungry. And when I say hungry, I mean like they don't get enough to eat. I'm not even joking when I say this. I've talked to guys at some programs where it's like, they say, like, sometimes we're all getting together to, because some places they don't have meal service. Yeah. Some days of the week, like all of the school week, yes. But some places, especially smaller schools, Sunday, you might be gathering together with your friends to pool your resources to try to get a couple of pizzas. So
no, that was that kid at Middle Tennessee State who was sleeping on the coach's couch and in the office, and he couldn't eat when the school cafeteria was closed, and all that stuff. Unbelievable. Right.
And that's Middle Tennessee State. We're not going a couple of levels below that. Well, so some of these guys are literally hungry. Donald Parham's a similar story. People are like, why is he so thin? Well, he's at a non-scholarship FCS program. So he's hungry, literally. Yeah. He's on a normal student meal plan. They don't have a special training table at no offense, but they don't. He eats. He's with the anthropology majors and the music majors and everyone else, just eating whatever they're eating.
Right.
So when he put on 15 pounds like that in the XFL, even like he wasn't even in the NFL, I was like, he's
eating food. Yeah,
he's getting food. Right. He's getting actual food.
Amazing.
So right. One other guy I want to hit on is Brady Davis.
Oh, sure.
So obviously, all the discussion of small school quarterbacks has essentially been about one guy this year, as you know well. A guy who played one game right? And didn't look all that great, but, didn't embarrass himself. It's like people are sort of wiped from their memories. They're actually other programs at the FCS and Division II level.
Shocking. Yeah. Shocking.
And I have it on good authority that some of these teams also have quarterbacks.
What? You don't say.
Just thought I'd throw that in there since you brought me off for my expertise. So Brady Davis has played not always well, but often well, and he plays in a very high level. I mean, as good he sees in terms of defenses. And once again, you brought up the Southland. At the other end of the spectrum in FCS football, is the Missouri Valley Conference, where they play defense. Yeah. I've seen games where it's like 9 to 3. I mean, they play defense like they mean it. Yep. So yes, it's a very different kind of football. A lot of power eye, it's very traditional football. Actually, it's funny if you really do want to find, like a capsule of football from an earlier era. The SEC isn't even the place to look nowadays. Yeah. It really is the Missouri Valley Conference.
No,
you
they
like
run
fullbacks?
They run it and they play. Yeah, they run it.
You like fullbacks? I've got something you'll enjoy. Welcome to the Missouri Valley Conference, where there's fullbacks.
Get the fullbacks who get the ball too. It's like
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, fullbacks who get the ball. So yes, Brady Davis has stuff to work with, and I'm going to throw in a guy, but I think
big arm, by the way. I
mean, he's got like your guy Cole Kelly, big arm. Yeah. I'm going to throw out one guy who my understanding is he is deciding to come. He can rechange his mind. He has more time, or does he? No, he doesn't.
I don't think so.
No, he doesn't need more. He doesn't. So I guess he's coming back next year. So it's a preview of next year. But Akil Glass, who is a senior, in fact, he's a graduate student already. So I guess he'll be almost on the Brady White track.
Absolutely. Cole Kelly, I think, is in the same boat. He's finished his master's program, I think.
Right. I guess he's working on a second master's. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with some of these kids. I don't know. But I guess they're not really kids anymore at that point. When you're working on a second master's, I guess you're a man.
Yeah.
But
Akil Glass can play.
There's a lot of things that you can really pick apart. And he reminds me in some good and bad ways of a guy that I got burned on before, but I'm fearless. I'll go back into that. So I loved Andre Woodson coming out of Kentucky. And physically and in terms of style of play, and even a little bit mechanically, he actually reminds me of him. But I also think that the game has changed a little bit. And I think that the NFL is realizing we don't have to be the most complex to be the best. You don't get extra points for degree of difficulty in your offensive system. Someone tell Gruden that too. Yeah. But I think for a while there, you know what I'm talking about. Well, the teams seem to almost pride themselves on, look at our playbook. We have 320 different passing plays. Look at us.
Yeah, and somebody's got to be able to figure all that stuff out. Yeah.
And now some teams have started going in the other direction. Maybe we don't need 320 different passing plays. Maybe we can get by with 100.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how many did Peyton Manning run? Like 3. So
well, lots of variants, but right,
I exaggerated a little bit, but really not too many. It was just kind of like, if you see this key, I'm going to do this. And if he does that, I do this, and that's it, but it's like, it really kept it simple for everyone, but you have to execute perfectly.
Yeah.
So, speaking of
right. And so people,
last word for you. Sure.
No, I was going to say that I'm glad, that some people figured out you don't, like I said, you don't have to have every single possible passing concept in your offense. It's fun, to sit in your office and dream all this stuff up. But I've talked to people, and I'm sure you have as well, who work in the league, coach in the league, and things like that. And they'll say, maybe 20% of our plays ever get run.
Yeah. And the other is like, you pull it out and have to explain to everybody what it is anyway, because you haven't run it in 6 months. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, speaking of not being able to do it, having what was my segue? My segue was, speaking of executing perfectly, Bill, You are the perfect guest for this show. We should do this every year. And if you want to do a show on your players, I'll be happy to be there someday for you. I mean, literally, there's there's basically 5 people who are really interested in these players. I think it's like Jordan Reed, and Emory Hunt, Bill Carroll.
God bless him.
I like to think of myself in that
Josh Buchanan. I wanted to give him
Josh Buchanan would be the other one I was going to say. Yeah, exactly.
And though he's back, taking his foot off the pedal a little bit. FCS Scout. What's his actual human name?
Yeah, but that's his handle on Twitter. But
I remember his name. Just Squally. Sean DePasquale.
There you go. Yeah, Sean. So it's like those of us who are into it are really. Yeah, well, those of us that are into it are really into it, and you clearly are into it, Bill. Appreciate having you on the show. Tell us, where can we best see your all underappreciated team and see you?
So it'll be posted after I do one last check of who's decided to go back to school, because I keep finding every time I check, it's like, I think I'm done, and it's like, no, he's also going back to school. It's like, oh.
I spent like a month trying to figure this out, but yeah.
So I'm going to take one last run at it, and then I'll just be wrong, I guess, after that point if I didn't. So I'm hoping that around Tuesday or so, I will be posting it on Nuts and Bolts. Right, exactly, right. Nuts and Bolts Sports. And you can always find Jeff Barnes and I, and we're about to have a bunch of great guests, actually. We just had Emory Hunt, aforementioned, on Fab Central, but we're having some great guests on. We're talking about all the different stuff and trying to tell people what stuff is, frankly, just stuff. Like, there's some of this is just, chaff, stuff, whatever, pick a term, that's just been thrown out there to, this is peak lying season. So I try to tell people, hey, some of this stuff is just, it's not.
Yeah, let it go. It's not real, right?
It's not so much. Probably 90% of what you've heard in the last couple of weeks about the draft is not anything. It's ephemera. It's stuff you'll flush down a toilet. So we'll be talking about some of that. You can also find some of my contributions on NFL Draft Bible. This is a newer relationship, so I will know soon more about exactly how much I'll be doing for them. But I'll be soon having a good grasp on that. So that's where you can find my work. And then obviously Twitter. I have 2 Twitter feeds, so no waiting. There is I'm always thinking about the people. So at BC, so that's capital B, capital C, ARROLL 138 at B Carroll 138, or the original sort of main office, which is at 11 Bravo. That's 11, the word, not the number, ELEVENBRAVO 138. And yes, I am reaching capacity, as you said. I am in far too many mock drafts. As soon as I'm done with this, I need to check to see if I'm up on several of them. But yes, it is always a pleasure, Will. And hopefully you'll be joining us soon, in like a week or so, on the Mock Draft Palooza.
I can't wait. Can't wait for another mock draft to go into my brain.
Because that's the last one, though. No more after that.
Thank you. Bill, thanks again for being with us. That'll do it for this edition of the Steeler Fury Pittsburgh Steelers Show, special on the B2B Directional State team with our special guest, Bill Carroll. And we'll catch you after the draft for our first reaction show. But thank you for listening to this whole week of amazing draft content that we've had, and to all our guests, including Bill. And we'll see you next time. I'm Wil Masisak.
Mike from Northern Alabama. I didn't forget about you. We just ran out of time.
Sorry, Mike. I didn't forget about you either. Okay. Anyway, my pleasure. And I will catch you the next time on this here network. Hit the subscribe button, help us out, help yourself out, and we'll keep giving you great Steelers and draft content. Later, see you next time. And go get them, Steelers.
Oh God, the Steelers need to have a good draft now.